Gonna rant. It's been a while since I've had a good rant. And this one's on healthcare. So, I'm a libertarian. I'm a conservative libertarian, somewhere in there. My political values align there. Ultimately, I see and understand what the progressives are getting to when they say, we should have universal health care. We should have single payer. We should have one of these systems. I understand their point. Healthcare is expensive, and it kind of sucks when you break an arm or something else happens. Healthcare has gotten to be absurd. We have these crazy administrative costs associated with it. But fundamentally, when it comes to government-led healthcare, I think the VA is the best example of what we can expect from socialized medicine. It's the best example, and it's fucking terrible. Nobody wants to go to the VA. They have crazy long wait times. Patients die there. Like, it is a poorly run administration, and we don't want more of that. Like, I wouldn't want to have government officials handling my healthcare. Not because I have an issue inherently with the government. It's just that by the time you get done, the government's equally inefficient as your insurance companies. So, why am I ranting about this? This year has kind of sucked in terms of medical stuff. I don't have a lot of faith in the medical establishment. I mean, I was anti-masks, and guess what? Now we're really having an open discussion about all the same things that I said early on, which is that there's no way this is going to be effective. There's a reason why people like me own $800 respirators to protect ourselves from actual hazards and not 50-cent masks. There's a reason why asbestos work doesn't specify a 50-cent mask from the grocery store as your method of protection. There's a reason why anybody who's working in a hazmat suit or a hazmat environment doesn't wear those things. They just don't work. But the medical establishment came out full support for that, and that was an issue for me. And this, again, goes back to the rant on why is it that I'm ranting about healthcare? Why am I ranting about socialized medicine? Because we have doctors who said this was a good idea. To put a mask around your face, which is looking like it's leading to significant negative health effects for children, particularly in speech development, and it's kind of a dehumanizing effect for our social interactions. It's probably a significant cause of why we were at each other's throats, because we weren't even seeing ourselves. Like, the face is very key for human beings to recognize other human beings. It's kind of a key feature there. So we had medical professionals with no evidence on the potential harms of masks and no supporting evidence on the potential benefits require that. And that's been, like, I guess 2 years out, kind of canceled out now. And I fought that as best I could, argued with all kinds of people on it. Second thing was the vaccine mandate. Now I'm unvaccinated. I'm okay with being unvaccinated. I'm not bothered by it in any way, shape, or form. I've had COVID. It wasn't really that big of a deal. I think I spiked 103-degree fever. Ibuprofen brought it down. And then I had kind of this low-level fever. It was like 99-ish, 98.6 to 99.1. I'm normally running 96.5, so technically it was high, but it wasn't like anything significant. State and federal rules required me to stay home, so I did. And I followed those rules. Worked while I was at home while I had a fever. So I had COVID. Wasn't a big deal. My wife, who is vaccinated, she got COVID before I did. She got it back in January. I got it in May. I somehow was trapped in a house with her because, me being unvaccinated, I'm unclean and can't go into the unwashed masses even though I have no symptoms. I got stuck with her for 10 days in a house while she was coughing and sneezing and had, like, fully symptomatic, and, like, it devolved into, like, this crazy nasal thing, and it was like she had it bad and she was vaccinated and I'm not, and I was forced to be around that. And I think that was a terrible decision. That's a terrible decision for the medical establishment. So why wasn't I vaccinated? Well, I'm a chemical engineer. I work right now as a nuclear engineer, but I was formerly trained as a chemical engineer. And as part of that, my specialties are energy and biomedicine. Not an expert by any means in either of those. I don't pretend to be an expert in either of those, but I do know their processes. So when somebody comes out, and the COVID didn't get bad until March of 2020. That was when everybody started like locking down and freaking out. It was the second week of March when we actually started caring about it. All the way up until February, people were posting articles about how, oh, it's no big deal. In January, Trump was a racist because he was restricting travel into the country, and by February we had, oh, let's stop this crazy fear mongering, and then sometime in March, all of a sudden, everybody realized that it was spreading like wildfire, and we had no idea what the case fatality rate was. I was actually concerned. If they'd had a vaccine in March, I probably would have taken it. But by the time we got to, November of 2020, it was very clear that the effects were relatively mild. In fact, I had a government document that explicitly, because I'm a nuclear engineer, right? So we have a government document that talks about why it is that we're safe. My job is compliance. I'm a glorified trash collector, garbage man. I spend most of my time figuring which of 12 different waste paths the various pieces of trash will end up so that they get buried in one of 3 specific holes in the United States. I'm not even joking. That is legitimately nuclear engineering. It's crazy amounts of paperwork and all of this knowledge. Sit there and throw something out in the right trash can. But I have in the back of my book a table. It's actually a whole appendix that's dedicated to risk and associated risk. And this is going to come back to why I'm ranting about healthcare. And the associated risk for a radiation worker is somewhere around at the federal limits, which is like 5,000 rem. 5,000 rem per year. I think 2,000 rem, not to exceed 2,000 rem per quarter, and not to exceed, I think, 500 millirem for for a pregnant mother or something like that. I think that's the breakdown in terms of dose rates. But if you follow that and you stay to that, your risk is something like 0.04%, your life risk. To put this into perspective for people, your driving is like way higher. Smoking is insanely higher. I don't have a copy of all the stuff there, but there's I think it's the Charney report did all these things, and it put it together and put it into a nice little, we just compiled it into a nice little table. I've tried to get it formally released. I probably will for schoolwork purposes, because it's one of the most best summaries. But I went to the CDC website to find out what the actual risks from COVID were. And it turns out that it's a 0.05% chance. Yeah, so the government has deemed that my exposure, or my potential exposure, I never see anything close to that, but my potential exposure is on the same order of life risk as COVID. And that's not including the fact that there is a huge difference that you could find in the occasional data tables for people with multiple comorbidities, extremely overweight. Basically, it's a disease that targeted unhealthy people. And again, the medical establishment backed mandatory vaccination of a product that it's insane that we did what we did. Now, again, I'm not anti-vax. I'm not opposed to vaccines in general. I didn't get one. I have no intention of taking it. I didn't like what they chose to do, and that's because of what it is. It's a brand new technology, and brand new biotechnology, whether it's a new protein that we're injecting or whether it's a new method of doing something. In this case, it was both, right? It's supposed to be this brand new that was the whole thing. It was a novel coronavirus, right? It was brand new. Our immune system had never seen this before. So we had a brand new protein that we're talking about having our own bodies manufacture, express on the cells, then have our immune system destroy it using a genetic vector targeting technology, and everything is supposed to work just fine, right? Just fine. We've never done this before. We've never had exposure to this protein. We don't know what the protein does. We've never had exposure to mass vaccination or mass induction, I should say, mass induction of immunization through genetic technologies. That's not something we've done on a mass scale. They can come out and say, oh yeah, this technology's been around for 30 years. Yeah, 30 years in a petri dish. Sure, I'll buy that. But that is not mass scale. we know vaccines work and they are safe. Vaccines are safe, right? Not genetic induction technologies, but vaccines are safe. We know this to be true. We know that generally our body can handle proteins placed in the system or dead viruses placed in the system and recognize them, and it trains our body up and we're ready to go. And instead of sitting there and taking this is turning into a longer rant than I was expecting. I apologize, people, but instead of taking the full virus, the entire viral envelope with its, I think it was 80 different proteins or 16 different proteins, or some mixture of the sites. It's been a while since I've looked it up, but instead of taking full recognition of the viral envelope and using a traditional vaccine process with accelerated timelines, we went for this completely brand new, ridiculous technology. I wasn't going to touch that. You know what else I wasn't going to touch? Anything that came out in 6 months, because in March, early March, is when everything went to shit, right? You can't tell me that we had the Operation Warp Speed, Trump's Operation Warp Speed, up and running, the second week of March. I can't remember what the actual date is. It wouldn't have been fully implemented. There was a whole bunch of approvals that would have had to happen the whole time. I'm sure that there was a lot of backroom discussion happening in the last 2 weeks of February, first 2 weeks of March, and there was probably a lot more going on that we're aware of, but it certainly wouldn't have been fully up and operational at the time. And they released the vaccines 3 days after the election, which really strongly suggested it was politically targeted because they didn't want to give Trump any credit for getting them out. Again, still wouldn't have taken them. Not because it's a Trump thing, not because I'm anti-Trump, not because I'm anti-Democrat, but it's because of the time frame. So the process to make a vaccine, it involves animal trials. Well, first you got to identify your protein, then you got to make the vaccine, and then you got to do your animal trials, then phase 1-ish animal trials or whatever. Then you got to do your phase 1, which I believe, I'm sure there's going to be somebody out there who's a little bit more specific to it. But there's a phase 1 dosing. I think phase 1 is safety, and then phase 2 is dosing and efficacy. But you have to go through these 2 phases, and then you get into phase 3, which was what we were technically in when these things were released. And your phase 3 data is where you basically kind of release it to the world and make sure it's okay. Given the timelines associated with this, right? Pfizer required a shot, followed by 2 weeks before you could get the second shot, a second shot, followed by 2 weeks before you're fully vaccinated. So 1 month. 1 month from start to finish between when you get your vaccine. That means that you have your phase 1, right? Your phase 1, your phase 2, and phase 3 trials are a minimum 1 month. But that's not enough, right? That's not all, folks. You aren't fully vaccinated until you hit that 1 month, right? You aren't fully vaccinated until you hit that 1 month. And safety trial data isn't going to be really considered until it's like 60 days after that first month, 30 to 60 days, somewhere in there. And COVID had a 3 to 14, at least the original strain, what we were operating on at the time, was a 3 to 14 day incubation period, followed by 2 weeks of it live and replicating in your body, right? So that means to understand the full course of the disease and the efficacy of these vaccines, it's 1 month to get vaccinated and another month at a minimum to collect data. And that is going to be true for the animal trials. That's going to be true for the phase 1 human trials and the phase 2 human trials, which means we're at 6 months right there, raw time. And so if we consider the second week of March to, let's call it the second week of November, March is the 3rd month, November is the 11th month. We technically have 8 months. So that'd be 6 months plus 2 months. And, oh yeah, by the way, and that would just be pure data. At some point, we have to squeeze in to this whole entire thing manufacturing. And yeah, okay, that process can probably proceed alongside it. The actual publishing of the report, which we're talking 75,000 pages of data, at least that's what we're being told is being released to us, 75,000 pages of data. Somebody has to write that. I'm sure there's a team of people. There could even be 75,000 of them. But you're not going to get me to the point where I'm like, yeah, okay, so in 2 months, spread out, we're probably talking, again, 3 phases. So in 2 months, you're going to have the identification of the protein, right? What you're going to use for this thing, the printing of the initial, the scale up to the initial animal trials, which would have had to happen before then. So I understand that there's new bioprinters that are doing that. And then you're going to have the report from each phase, which has to go through the approvals phase to get into your approval for phase 2 trial, right? Your animal studies have to get approved. Then your phase 1 study data has to get approved. Then your phase 2, or your animal phase gets approved. Your phase 1 trials get approved. Your phase 2 trials get approved. And then after your phase 2 trials are completed, you get to go submit it for approval from the FDA, even if we considered a relatively short time frame, right, of 2 weeks to gear up to the first animal trial, and then 2 weeks each subsequent time just for approvals. We're looking at so you have your pre, your post animal, post phase 1, post phase 2. That is that's 2 months right there. You're done, right? You're done. That provides no time for anything else other than if we were doing live virus challenges to the vaccinated individuals that were in the study, maybe it would be believable. But we're not even doing that. We're talking about, for our phase 1 and phase 2 human trials, these people have to be recruited, which again can happen alongside the rest of the stuff. But these people then have to be exposed, right? So how long does exposure take? You can't assume on day 1, right, of them being vaccinated that they're all done, or then you have all the how many people have to get shot. Like you're talking about a phase up for each of these things into it, and that's going to have probably at a week on each end at a minimum, maybe probably 2 weeks more likely to get all of the people with their first shot, 2 weeks to get all of their people with their second shot, and then at least 2 weeks to a month before they're actually, you have a representative population exposed to this thing. So by the time you're done, the development of the vaccines was way too short. Mathematically, scientifically, engineering process-wise, you could not claim that it was safe and effective because you just wouldn't have the data on it, right? Safety, maybe you'd have safety data, assuming that, everybody was being honest and forthright, which turns out most pharmaceutical companies aren't. They just haven't been. They've lied. They lie on pretty much every application. That actually used to be something the right and the left kind of universally agreed on, is that pharma lies all the time. So you'd have to assume that they're telling the truth, and that our government is doing the job that it is in the most efficient way possible. And oh yeah, by the way, you're still exceeding the amount of time to get this thing approved. So they had to. There's only 2 possibilities. One is they knew a lot more than they said they knew earlier on, which would, basically kind of suggest a little bit more on the lab leak hypothesis. Certainly column A is possible, right? And then the alternative is that they just took a shortcut. They didn't do it right. But again, this is one thing where the medical establishment jumped in full bore and said, yep, I'm okay with this. And that bothers me. That bothers me a lot that they did that. So going up into this year, I don't have a very strong opinion of doctors and the medical establishment. And this, I've always talked to them, and they always kind of maybe it's because we don't have a very long period of time, but I've always kind of rejected that principle and that hypothesis that they are these great sovereigns of science and mathematics, because I don't think they are. Most of the kids who went through med school programs, I don't know a lot of doctors in my circle. Hold on just a moment, I gotta pause this. My dog is interacting with a neighbor's dog. Oh, that's pretty cool. It does pause and restart. So yeah, I don't have a really high opinion of doctors, and maybe that's because I don't know very many. They're not in my personal orbit. Engineers kind of hang out with themselves, and doctors kind of hang out with themselves. But I've never really had a good experience with a doctor. Not a particular. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. The guy who worked on me up in Lake Placid, New York. I don't know what your name is, guy, but I came in like just before you were about to close, and I just before you put me under as you were repairing my arm that I hiked out from for 6 miles with. Before you put me under, you just leaned over and you said the meds that I wanted to use require 2 people to approve, and the other guy isn't picking up his phone. But I have a whole medicine cabinet, so I can take you under and bring you back if something goes wrong. And that was probably the best experience I had. Like it's completely irreverent, and I had so much fentanyl in my system, because apparently I'm resistant to opiates, so they had to pump me full of that. That I'm sure that he was like, yeah, this guy's high as a kite, and that was just kind of how that process worked. He was a good doctor, but for the most part, every time I've had any sort of illness, I had this swollen thing in my armpits, was like the size of a football, just appeared overnight. Temperature spiked to 104. All kinds of crazy stuff was going on, and I went to the emergency clinic and nothing improved. They gave me a whole bunch of pills. My temperature kept on climbing. Clearly life-threatening stuff. I was just figuring they'd lance it and drain it, right? Because you don't get a football-sized chunk in your armpit without something like that overnight. And I remember getting charged $800 for a diagnosis on the bill. And all they did was, they didn't come in, like the guy looked at me for 15 minutes, gave me 16 pills, and said, off you go. Right? It was like I had a smorgasbord of meds that I was taking. I still don't know what it was. Nobody told me what it was. I don't think they know what it was. So getting charged $800 for a diagnosis is a bit steep there, doc. And that was at Morton Hospital in Taunton. But this year has taken the cake. Not only did we have the thing with masks, not only did we have doctors sitting there and advocating for vaccine technology without understanding that there's no way they could make the claims that they were making on it, or even acknowledging that pharma lies all the freaking time. My wife and I ran into a new problem, and that is that we are trying to have a kid. And this is kind of hard to talk about. I'm sure she'd be mad at me if this blew up or whatever. But you get through 6 months, nothing's happened. Not sure why. I was drinking a little bit more at the beginning of the year, pretty much cut that out straight in April. Got one bad test on me, and out it went. But we go into the doctor and say, hey, we've been trying for 6 months, nothing's happened, what's going on? And the doctor runs her through some tests, gives me a test as well. The test that I get, the numbers don't have any units associated with it. I can't compare it to other things. I was basically, I was studying my own sperm parameters for God knows how long, trying to figure out what the hell each one meant. I dug into the World Health Organization table. They have a whole table of them, right? Of what's normal, what's not, where your percentiles are. I had a home test that I was taking. All were showing that I was perfectly normal. And then, I took one test, and I think those numbers were low, but it was kind of a weird test. And, I looked at it. I basically spent the whole weekend in a hot tub drinking beer. So I kind of told my wife that there's no way that test came out normal. It's amazing. It takes like 90 days for like sperm to actually cook off and be like healthy. So anything that happens that degrades your sperm quality can happen up to 90 days before you actually go for having a kid. So I cut everything out and did that to fix my stuff. My numbers are back up. And obviously they sent her in for testing as well. And the OBGYN sent her for the test, scheduled the test, took the data, and then said, oh, you're going to have to go to a specialty clinic. And so we go to the specialty clinic. And the specialty clinic calls up on the first day and says, what are you in? It's a fertility clinic. That's all they do, right? The first question out of the nurse practitioner's mouth is, what are you in for? Like, what the fuck do you think we're in for? Like, there's only one thing that you do. It's not a very varied practice, right? What are you in for? So obviously that didn't go over well with me. I started off with the, oh, really? Is that how this is going to be? Kind of attitude. And then, instead of sitting there and talking about what the numbers that she saw in my tests or the numbers that she saw in my wife's tests, instead of sitting there and talking about options and probabilities or any of these other sciencey technical things that I kind of expect, she just said, we're going to send you in for more tests. More tests? Why more tests? You have tests. Tell us what those tests say. Tell us what your largest inkling is. Like, we could give you whatever data you want. We've been taking data this whole time. I'm a goddamn engineer, and she works with engineers. My wife, I work at the lab, and my wife works at our kind of sister site as in doing like project analytics. Like, we're data people. That's what we are. We have data. We recorded everything we can. And the answer is, oh, it's unknown. We don't know what's going on, yada, yada, yada. It doesn't look like she even looked at the test that we took. We paid $450 for medical tests that a doctor didn't even look at. And I think, we've gone through this thing. They changed her to a much less bedside table-y manner, which is better for us, right? We're not really, Dr. House is the kind of, I don't really care what you think or what you feel. Like, I don't want somebody to come in and tell me, oh, we want to have you have a baby. You don't care if I have a baby. I care if I have a baby. You do not. You care that you get my money. That's what you're there for. Understanding your role in the relationship in my life is very, very important. You take money, you give me success, not anything else. And so it comes to me and my other thing for this year, which is official. And for those who don't know, it's kind of gross. It's kind of gross. Beware medical stuff. It is basically an infected anal gland that didn't leak out properly or drain properly, and so eventually wormed its way up and connected to my internal intestine. So it basically gets the bacteria from the internals of your intestine keep on pumping into this hole, and so you constantly, like, it just never heals. And so I went to go see a colorectal surgeon in April, right around the same time as all this testing, right? And tons of antibiotics. So yeah, I got attacked by a dog. That was fun, right? Yeah, that's let's see. Can you see it? Yeah, that is a like a German Shepherd bite. He attacked somebody else. I actually had to render aid to them in the street. That was kind of fun. Terrible. I'm gonna have to go deal with that. It's on my to-do list. But I call back. We have high deductible insurance. I understand the progressives ranting about this stuff. I understand, normal people saying, hey, maybe single payer is the option. I have high deductible insurance, so I call back to the colorectal guy's office 6 months after I've seen him, right? I paid $226 to have him stick his finger up my ass and fiddle around up there. Paid the money. And he says, oh, you're going to have to come back in. It's been 5 months. What are you going to do? What are you going to find this time that you didn't find the last time? You know what I mean? And so, when I see these people talk about single payer, I understand, there's a selfish component, right? A lot of these people are in the, hey, I would rather not pay for my health care. And therefore, if it's free to me today, even though it goes off on the middle class, because that's the only people with all the money, even though the middle class would sit, I want to soak everybody else for my health care. And there's a selfish component to people who are very interested in single payer, right? They want other people to essentially pay for their services. And it's always, they think it's the rich, but if you actually sit down and get down to the number of people who are uber wealthy, there isn't enough, they don't earn enough money to pay for such a system. But the real problem is doctors. Doctors that don't do their job, right? We put forward this, doctors and teachers and all these other groups are like these really smart people and we should respect them. But should we? Should we really, truly do that? I mean, given the fact that we had doctors sitting there coming out and telling us that face masks work when they clearly don't, and there was a lot of evidence at the time that suggested they wouldn't. We had doctors coming out and sitting there and advocating for a new technology that they, at least from an engineering perspective, they had no way to make the claim that they were. Um, they just the timelines don't add up. You physically can't accomplish what they were claiming to accomplish in that period of time. And they were supporting it, blind faith or whatever else. And then every single time I go to a doctor, all they do is recommend more tests. Every time. There's no solution, no knowledge that I gain. I don't walk in like if I go to a car mechanic who charges me, by the way, like $105 an hour. If I go to a car mechanic and he does a diagnostic, my car comes back fixed. If I go to a doctor, he has come back in for a second appointment. What the actual fuck? And this is what's driving up the cost of medical care for us. By the way, there are free market solutions, just to throw in the libertarian thing out there, right? I can't get them. Not in Massachusetts. Or, sorry, not in New York. I used to live in Massachusetts. It kind of falls off the tongue. Either of them are very restrictive. But, we could have done full fertility hormone panel tests, and instead of paying $450, I think it was like $120 if I wanted to order the exact same test. Couldn't do it. Nope, couldn't do that. Because it's a racket. It's a goddamn racket. There's cheaper, better, more effective ways to deliver healthcare through capitalist practices. But if we want to have this feel-goody relationship, I don't see how imposing a government-based solution is going to do anything other than make it more expensive and less effective. I don't know. That's my rant. I'm sick and tired of doctors being held up as if they're anything more than a car mechanic for your body. And yeah, okay, there's a risk factor there. I get that. But at least when I take something to the car mechanic, it gets fixed. When I take it to a doctor, it's questionable. Well, that's my rant.